In November 6, 2013, 4 years after their disappearances, 3 bodies, 2 adults and a young child, were found lying face down in a line by a deer hunter in the Smokestack Hollow area of Panola Mountain, 2.7 miles from where the Jamison truck was found. The area was miles from any paved roads and extremely remote. The 3 bodies were severely decomposed, and the remains consisted of 3 skulls, an undocumented number of bones and bone fragments, the victim's shoes, and some scraps of clothing. It took over 8 months for the police to formally confirm what most people had by that point long assumed, that the bodies were those of the Jamison family. When questioned why the initial searches had found nothing, despite their scale, Assistant Special Agent of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation told reporters, somewhat dismissively, that falling leaves potentially obscured the bodies. Due to the extensive decomposition that had occurred in the 4 years since their disappearance, it was deemed impossible to determine a cause of death, though one of the skulls, that of Bobby, had a small hole which was initially suspected as being a bullet wound. Later, the police dropped this line of inquiry, but the hunters who found the bodies disagreed. Initially, Sheriff Beauchamp had thought that foul play was involved, but 4 years had passed and Beauchamp had since left the service. The incoming sheriff, Jesse James, told press when asked about the line of inquiry the case was following, simply stated, "It's a very strange deal, you know, the way this case has unfolded. We're looking at a lot of things have crossed my mind." And so it remains today. After enlisting the help of 12 FBI agents, 3 OSBI agents, Oklahoma Highway Patrol's Troop Z, PIs, and eventually even psychics, the case is now utterly cold. Facts are laid out, but nothing leads to anything concrete. Later, after leaving the police force, Beauchamp spoke in a documentary on the case, stating that normally you can go through an investigation, and one by one you can start to eliminate certain scenarios. We haven't been able to do that in this case. With this family, everything seems possible. The theories that do surround the Madison family case range from sound to utterly bizarre. The cold nature of the case has allowed speculation to run wild, and while some lean heavily on the facts, there are other theories which are less inclined. The following theories are not exhaustive, but instead a general overview of some of the most enduring. One theory, heavily disputed by relatives of Bobby and Sherilyn, is that of murder-suicide. On the surface, this theory mainly gains traction by concerning itself with both the mental state of Sherilyn and the chronic back pain of Bobby, leading both to have a somewhat plausible motive. Several of Sherilyn's friends commented on her deteriorating mental health, and she would sporadically take herself off of her prescription meds. Her manic episodes were also known to be spiteful and often angry, and with the events leading up to their disappearance, she was in a very low and dark space. In the case of Bobby, he was known to struggle with back pain. He walked with a slouch, and his being unable to work had left him depressed. Low morale and severe pain on a daily basis are difficult things to live with for anyone, and Bobby had shown signs of unusual behaviour, specifically asking his pastor about spiritual warfare. Both Bobby and Sherilyn were known to have been on a large amount of prescription medication at the time of their disappearance for depression. Then, of course, there is the long 11-page letter which detailed how much Sherilyn disliked her husband. It is theorised that either the letter is a form of suicide note, or possibly a motive for Bobby. Did Sherilyn write it as an explanation for her actions, or did Bobby find it and snap? However, Sherilyn's friend Nikki spoke of the letter, explaining it away as Sherilyn's form of therapy. She would write things down when they came into her mind, but then she would move on. She loved Bobby, she said. Murder-suicide would, however, seemingly explain why the gun was not left in the truck. However, it does beg the question, where is the gun now? And what of the brown briefcase that had too apparently vanished? The family's relatives maintain that the move to the wilderness was the family trying to turn a corner and put the past behind them, that they were very much in love and firmly disagree with any theory involving suicide or murder-suicide. The theory that the Jamison family was murdered is one of the more convincing but heavily speculated theories, and it ranges from disgruntled locals after The Outsiders B-movie style to Mexican drug cartels and beyond. Bobby's father was a suspect for a very short period. Despite their ongoing disputes and the alleged threats towards the family, Bobby Sr. was 67 years old and at the time of the family's disappearance was living in a care home. In fact, 2 months on from their disappearance, he himself passed away. These facts generally knock him firmly from the list of suspects. But what of Kenneth, the family friend who turned out to be a white supremacist? He too was briefly a suspect in the case, but as it happened, was found to be in jail at the time of their disappearance, and so he too can be struck off the list. Sherilyn's mother, Connie Cockatan, herself believes murder to be the most likely scenario in the deaths of the family. "There's no way they just wandered off and got lost," she said. "What I truly believe is that they went up there, saw something they shouldn't, and were murdered by someone. Who that was, I just don't know. The way their truck was left, it looks like it had been forced to stop by someone. Everyone round here knows there are lots of evil people up in those mountains. It's where outlaws like Jesse James used to hide out. It's so isolated. I'm scared to go up there." If murder truly was the fate of the Jamisons, it might explain the missing briefcase and gun, but it asks one rather large question which simply has no answer. What would have been the motive for killing a family in the middle of nowhere who was simply out looking to buy a plot of land? There has been much speculation on the Jamisons being addicted to or involved in meth. Meth is known to have been a problem in the area of Oklahoma that they lived in, and has led some to speculate that this had deeply affected the Jamisons and their fate either directly or indirectly. First is the theory that the Jamisons were involved in taking meth themselves. The couple's emaciated appearance in the security video, alongside their actions during packing, of stopping and staring into the distance, or generally acting spaced out, are the main drivers. Some even speculate that the brown briefcase was a drug case they used to store their drugs and paraphernalia away from Madison. The sheriff himself stated about the security video, "On the video, they would just stop and stare. It was strange." If they were users, the theory goes, then perhaps they are in a dark place indeed, and this possibly led to murder-suicide, or happening upon a local who caught them abusing in the woods. As far-fetched as these sound, there is one other theory concerning drugs that suggests that whilst not users themselves, the Jamisons were attempting to arrange a one-time meth deal to alleviate their financial difficulties, and the deal had turned sour. Again, the brown briefcase comes to play, with most exponents of this theory suggesting that it was either full of drugs to be sold or money to exchange. This theory does, however, ignore that the Jamisons did in fact have several timeshares across New Mexico and the US, as well as the $32,000 in cash that was found in the truck. The money in the truck is more than likely a share of the $64,000 recently split between Bobby and his father, and further, when the house and truck was searched, no evidence of drugs were found in either. Connie Cockatan stated when asked if they had been known to take drugs that they were not taking meth. "There is no way. How could they have looked after little Madison if they were? They were good parents and they would not have been capable of that if they were on meth." One of the more out there theories involves a cult going by the name of the United White Knights. Sherilyn's friend, Nikki, had launched a campaign to try to find out more information concerning the fate of the Jamisons when she was contacted by an anonymous woman who told her that she had been involved in the group and that Sherilyn and Bobby had been names on a hit list that they maintained. Whilst Nikki herself holds little stock in the claim, she did hold reservations, stating that, I went up to those mountains about a year later, and near where the bodies were found, there was a line of cars parked with Texas license plates. When we got near the actual spot, there were a couple of gunshots. They sounded like warning shots to me. I don't scare easily, but that place really freaks me out. There is something not right about it. Who, what or why, however, is rarely approached in such theories, and there is little stock outside of the fact that in the remote location of the foot of the mountains, cults could operate in secret. It does all seem rather far-fetched. Why would such a group maintain a hit list in the first place? One of the theories that attempts to hand-wave away much of the evidence to the case is that the Jamisons simply perished after getting lost in the wilderness. Whilst there have certainly been cases of people quickly getting lost in even small distances, this theory doesn't quite fit. If it was the case that they got out of the truck and went for a walk, firstly, you would be excused for asking why. More pressingly, why would they have left the dog and all of their phones, coats, and importantly, the GPS unit in the car? Especially when walking out into a rather secluded patch of wilderness on a day that is known to have been cold. Pressingly, a GPS unit would surely be high on your list of priorities for things to take along. Despite this, it is not impossible and is certainly more plausible than some other theories. In the end, the case of the Jamisons leaves much room for speculation, and in the vacuum of a cold case gives little chance for much else. The case lies discarded, and the fate of the Jamisons is unlikely to be uncovered short of anyone coming forwards with new and concrete information. Throughout the life of the case, there were never any arrests made by police, and nor were there any solid suspects. And so it stays, a case with more questions than answers. A web of confusion and speculation. What did happen to the Jamisons at the foot of the mountains, and who, if anyone, is guilty?